You've just shared a podium with an illustrious group of international and local speakers discussing leadership in the 21st century, leadership post the global recession. What do you think the core challenges are?
Core challenge is for leaders to very clearly articulate a vision that people can believe in. But that articulation is not just rhetorical articulation. Leaders must live the dream. And the people who were sharing a podium with me, when you look at a person like Adrian Gore, there's a man who's living the dream. And I believe that it's possible also in the public sphere to identify people who live the dream. President Mandela, the Albert Lutulis and the Walter Sisulus of this day. But today, in our society, your generation, there are many very impressive young South Africans in professional areas of our society, as well as in the business sector. And I think it is possible for us to be those leaders who lead by example.
All right, let's continue on this tack and draw specifics on the South African condition today. You're one of the conveners, in fact the chair of the conveners of the Dinokeng scenarios, and again you were business leaders, civic leaders, former government technocrats sitting down and mapping out a course for South Africa over the next 10 years or so. When you look at South Africa, how far we've come and where we're going, what would your assessments be?
My assessment would be that we are a great country. We are endowed with absolutely unbelievable natural beauty and resources. And the greatest resource are the people of South Africa. We have done an amazing job. As Adrian showed with his facts and figures, we have done amazingly as a young democracy over a mere 16 years. Remember, the United States has been at the job for more than 200 years. And we are merely 16 years away from the dawn of our democracy. And yet, having celebrated what we have achieved, the shortfall, the gap between where we could be and where we are represents a missed opportunity. And that missed opportunity comes from not making sure that we pull together as a nation. So the whole, in terms of our performance, is less than the sum of the parts. Because individually we excel, but together we don't really get the synergies.
Why is that? Because just economically, we are on the border of 3% growth, which is actually below the African average, for instance. We've now got unemployment sitting in the region of 25.3%, still rising, many people are saying. We've got what people say, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, in a country with the greatest constitution on the continent. Why these disparities?
The biggest cause and source of continuing disparities is the failure of our education and training system. And there the problem is wrong policy choices we made after 1994. You know, when you inherit a company as a new leader, you are a turnaround specialist. You don't check out everybody from the company. You identify those people in the company who are doing well, those business lines that are fantastic, and you build on them. And then you end up with a much better company. What we did with our education system was to throw the baby away with the bathwater. And we ended up with very little water, very many damaged babies, and here we sit. 16 years after our democracy, our education system underperforms even Malawi. So the problem is really that we have made a mistake, and thank God that now we've got a minister who has publicly acknowledged that. And we now must build, and we are capable of rebuilding.
All right, just give us a sense of what can be done, because I mean, your portfolio at the World Bank in human development focused on issues like education and healthcare. How do we go forward?
Back to basics. Any society that wants to succeed has to set very high standards for its education and training system. We have tended to underestimate the capacity of young South Africans to tackle tough and complex problems. All we need, starting with higher education, we have to demand of a higher education system to excel, not to be these mediocre institutions that many of them are. And that has to be tied up with the subsidy formula. The formula must reward excellence and punish mediocrity. But of course, we've got to support those that are mediocre to be given a chance to improve. But if they don't improve, you pull the rug. The same thing with the school system. We know that even in the poorest townships, there are schools that excel. It's not money. It is will, it's leadership, it is commitment of the teachers and the parents and the students, discipline. Discipline is missing at the highest levels, right down to the lowest levels. And finally, we need to revive the dignity of work. That to train in a skill, to be an artisan, should be a source of pride. Yeah. I went to the Mercedes factory floor the other day. I tell you, it is unbelievable to watch black, white, male, female South Africans doing fantastic jobs. We produce 90% of Class C Mercedes-Benz for exports. Yeah. Because we have actually been rated as the best producer. Because we have it in us to excel, but we underestimate and we have very low expectations of ourselves.
Leaders everywhere, and I think a lot of the criticism falls on the shoulders of government because as taxpayers we feel that they're accountable to us. But it almost absolves corporate SA from any responsibility, some people would argue, in leading the charge.
Well, South African business has to take a long-term view. Many take a very short-term view. But it is also true to say that those business leaders who have come forward and wanted to have this big view and vision were in the past discouraged by government's unwillingness to listen and sometimes super sensitivity to criticism or this route is not leading us anywhere. But having said that, I don't believe that corporate South Africa can afford to sit back in the face of the underperformance of the society. That we need every company to look at its own business and say, I'm in the mining industry. I'm going to make sure that I invest in the training of artisans, of engineers, of people related to my industry. The same thing should happen in the financial services sector, everywhere. If every one of the corporates in this country were investing in their own enlightened self-interest, this country would be humming.
People often say, you know, we'd come to Africa because the labor is cheap. But in a country like South Africa, it is not cheap, it's politicized, and what they're offering by way of input is not what's needed by way of the skills that are required for the various inputs within production.
Absolutely. I think we need a big circle of conversation, public conversations I was talking about earlier on in my talk. That government, the private sector, and the trade union movement must sit together, not in these big kind of rhetorical discussions that they sometimes have, but to look exactly at these issues. Because there are some industries, the sectors, where the union is working very well with the management. And let's look at those examples. What is it there that makes it work? And how can we take what works in those individual sectors into the wider economy? I think if we can bring in the lessons from the last few years of getting real productive relationships, we can in fact crack this. Because remember, Mercedes-Benz had an unbelievable strike in the 70s. Today, they have a factory shop which is equal to none. Why? Because they learned from the bitter experiences on both sides of that. Now, what we don't do in this country is spend enough time learning, not making speeches, learning from our experiences, building on the successes, and moving forward to manage our weaknesses. This is one area where we can just do it. When it comes to education and training, we can do it. And we have infrastructure equal to none. We can really be a leader in so many areas if only we pull together. And I don't think it's impossible.